Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neo.Life Book Celebration. I am Jen Reddy. I am the president of Manifest Boston. We are a nonprofit organization in Boston, and our mission is to ignite and unleash the potential of Boston through stories of doers and dreamers and makers who live here and are creating our future. Our founding members are the Boston Globe and Harvard, MIT, and MGH, and we are thrilled to co-host this evening and witness this incredible conversation. So thank you for being here. This is truly, and many of you are tuning in through the Neo.Life channels on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, as well as the social channels of Manifest Boston and Ginkgo Bioworks. Please share with us where you are and where you are viewing. We would love to know where you are and be able to talk back with you. And that being said, we are really excited to have you all participate tonight and encourage you, share your opinions and contribute. We want to feel your energy. All we ask is that you abide by some simple ground rules, which should all be pretty normal now in this virtual world that we're living in. We just ask you to be kind and to be productive and to support one another. And if you need a reference, all of our rules are in the chat, and I'm sure they will be easy for you to follow. Before I hand it over, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who's participating and introduce you to Jason Kelly, who is the co-founder of Ginkgo Bioworks. If you don't know about Ginkgo Bioworks, they are also in Boston, and they are the leading synthetic biology company. They call themselves the organism company. And until now, their primary business has been creating flavors and fragrances and pharmaceuticals. But I think what is more important is how they have pivoted and are contributing so much to the COVID-19 crisis. And I will let Jason tell you about that and explain a little bit more about what his company is doing now and what they're doing to impact our future. So Jason, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. So yeah, maybe just a little background on Ginkgo for those of you that don't know. Yes, we're a synthetic biology company, and the core idea behind Ginkgo is we'll program cells like we program computers because they run on digital code in the form of DNA, right? So it's ATCs and Gs, not zeros and ones. But you can read this code with DNA sequencing, and you can write it with DNA synthesis or DNA printing. And if you can read and write code and you have a machine to run it, that's programming. And Ginkgo is now the largest printer of DNA in the world. So about 25% of the genes that are printed worldwide are designed by us. And, it's been an interesting experience. The last 5 years, we've raised about $800 million, scaled out a lot of facilities to do all that genetic engineering, DNA printing. But, I got in the field now almost 20 years ago when I first met George and others and the co-founders of the company back at MIT. And we had this weird experience where we were really passionate about engineering biology, and we're like, biology's so amazing, it's so powerful, and everyone is kind of like completely takes biology for granted, right? Like they're like, whatever, it's not that important, and I'm like, but it makes the atmosphere and it makes all our food, and and you plant a seed and you grow a plant, it's like solar panels, it's incredible, and everyone's big yawn, right? And we're now all uniquely going through this really terrible experience with COVID-19, and that narrative for us as a community of bioengineers and cell programmers is going to very much change with the public, right? The public is going to be very aware of how powerful this technology is. And we're going to need the types of folks who you're going to hear from tonight, who are some of the best storytellers and visionaries around engineering biology to help people navigate this, right? I mean, it's going to be, a big question for society. People are going to try to understand, what can we do with this? And I think one of the most important things as a community of synthetic biologists and cell programmers that we can do today is be part of this solution to really this biological event that we have with COVID-19. And that's what we've done with Ginkgo. We've taken our platform, and about 3 weeks ago, we announced we would do $25 million of free work through the infrastructure. We put out an open call to scientists and researchers working on therapeutics, vaccines, diagnostics to COVID-19. Within 3 days, we had about 100 replies to that just coming in. And one of the things that struck me about this is I think a lot of what we're feeling as like the world is responding to this is you're seeing, nations have to, I got to fight for this PPE and this, and it's very like kind of a locally and nationally focused response when it comes to healthcare and public health. but the technology development, trying to develop rapid diagnostics, trying to develop a therapeutic or in the long term a vaccine, that's a global response, right? Whoever does it, we're going to be happy. It doesn't matter, right? And so you're seeing a global collaboration around that, which is tremendously inspiring to me. You see researchers openly sharing, publishing information immediately. No one talks about IP. Drug company, the amount of resource we're seeing poured against a common problem. Certainly, the first time in my life that we've seen that, to have just a global scale issue like this with the whole world focused on it. And so I'm really heartened to play a small piece in that through the work we're doing and the team is doing at Ginkgo. But I'm also excited that it's sort of a moment for us all to step in. And I'm excited to hear from all the folks tonight to help tell stories about this. And cheers to Jane and the book tonight. And happy to virtually celebrate with you all, even though we can't do it in person. So
that's cheers. Amazing. Jason, I think we all, raise our glass to you guys for making such a huge commitment. And, I understand that this means basically completely reconfiguring what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's been a big shift. Yeah, pretty much taking all the various parts of the company and get them repointed at what we can do for COVID. We took our sequencing pipeline and repurposed it against diagnostics. We take the cell engineering and are partnering up with folks, for example, doing vaccine production and then also starting to do some work in therapeutics. So yeah, that's very. Here's the thing though. I think it gives. It's giving us a sense of agency, right? So I think this is another thing that's really nice that the biotech community has in this particular situation. I think everyone's feeling adrift, and having this ability, certainly for me, to feel like we can actually do some work that could be helpful. It just helps, and so that's actually been a pretty nice experience. The team stepped up amazingly.
If you had to bet, which would you think would be your first big win? Would it be on diagnostics? I mean, it's probably not going to be a vaccine. Would it be diagnostics or treatment?
I mean, what's interesting to this is there's going to be like just crisp phases to this whole thing. So in the very near term, in the US anyway, we need a substantially stepped up response in diagnostics. I personally think that's going to be true worldwide. I think you're going to keep seeing these waves of recurrence in the virus. And then we'll see. I mean, the therapeutics is always a dice roll. Right. And so hopefully one of the antibody drugs that people are working on is successful. If not, we're all waiting on a vaccine.
So someday we will be beyond this current pandemic and you'll go back to business as usual, or do you think there'll always be a part of your business that's going to be focused on pandemics going forward?
I think there'll always be a part. Yeah. I mean, we're, this was sort of like a surprise. Like it shouldn't, to the experts of the field, it's not a surprise, but to the public, and this is a surprise, right? And we can't.
Well, yes and no.
For many people in our community, I'd say that, but like the scale and scope of this, I think, has people on their heels, and I think as a society, we can't allow this, right? And it's high time, right? Like we need to be doing a better job with rapid response to public health crises and detection and things like that. That all needs to just get in place. And so this, I think, is a great opportunity to do that. I think you'll see countries step up to do that. Again, worldwide. That's the other thing. It's where this originated in another country. The last, what SARS that originated here, right? Like there's it's not like it's a global problem. You're going to need a global surveillance system and solution system.
That's right. I mean, we are China, we are Italy, we are New York.
100%. 100%. Nothing makes that more clear. And we're all humans, right? Like that's the other thing. This thing just hits us all, right? So it also points out that like common species bond that sometimes gets lost, when we are thinking about our either local communities or countries. Again, it's made eminently obvious by this situation that we're all the same.
Well, and I think that's one of the big promises of synthetic biology, isn't it? It's like, the scientists are collaborating across national boundaries. They're collaborating across disciplines. We have an opportunity to work together and think about biological systems as a whole, as a planet. And that's pretty exciting. And, I have friends suffering from COVID, including one in particular who we do a little meditation for every day at noon. It's Breathing with Joe. We all get together and breathe with Joe at noon. And he's starting to recover, which is great. But, yes, thank you. We could all take a deep breath here for a minute, maybe, and just
please
breathe with Joe or breathe with anybody who is suffering with this and fighting this, because this is a terrible tragedy. And it could lead to a tremendous opportunity here to really transform our healthcare system. And, we talk about maybe war, revolution was the only way to do this, or it turns out pandemic. And I think,
I mean, it's collective action at a global scale. There are very few things. I mean, humans just have a hard time doing that for variety. I wish it wasn't like that, but it is. And here's a moment where we, there's the other side of this thing is just a universally bad thing, right? It's no gray zone about it. So that's a real chance for the world to step up together.
Well, and you guys have totally stepped up. I mean, a $25 million commitment across all these different opportunities is huge. And thank you. Thank you for your pivot. Thank you for your generosity. And I hope really exciting things come out of these projects that you're incubating and collaborating with.
Yeah, well, thanks. And thank you for all the work you do in telling the story of what's coming for people. I think that's going to be a lot more, like I said, a lot more important coming up as people try to wrestle with what biology means in their lives now that it's so much more evident.
Well, and that's a great segue to describing what we do at Neo.Life. So I'm Jane Metcalf. I am the founder and CEO of Neo.Life. We are a 3-year-old company now, and we were formed to cover what I consider to be the biggest story of our times, which is how Homo sapiens are using technology to harness the power of living systems. Or to put it another way, biology is our newest technology. So we are journalists and storytellers, and we are tracking the people and the science and the companies that are at the forefront of this development. And again, cross disciplines, across both academic and industry. And also, we track what's happening in the DIY movement. We look at food, we look at medicine, we look at technology, we look at genetics and neuroscience and longevity studies. We look at the microbiome and food systems. And along the way, we're building a community of engaged doers who are thinking about how the bioeconomy will transform us. So you can follow what we do on social media, which is how many of you are coming to us now. Or better yet, you can go to our website, which is www.neo.life, because .life is actually a domain name, and it's cooler than .com. You can buy our book there. You can sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get our latest news and feature stories, and you can also hear about upcoming events. So we are together this evening to celebrate the publication of this, our new book, Neo.Life, 25 Visions for the Future of Our Species. And, my initial plan for this evening was to actually be in Boston, swilling a molecular cocktail and nibbling on exotic, fermented foods grown in vats. But since we can't actually see you, we want to actually hear a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from. So if you could, feel free to chime in. And I see lots of people telling us who they are in our live stream. So please keep that up. Feel free to ask questions. We've got moderators on all platforms. Thanks to both Ginkgo Bioworks and Manifest Boston. It's not only Neo.Life's platforms, but also those platforms, Ginkgo and Manifest on Twitter and Facebook. So hopefully we'll have lots of interesting questions coming in. But what we want to get started with is a poll to just kind of get a sense of where you are and what you're thinking about. So let's put up the first question for the poll, and you can answer on whatever platform you're on, and we will collate the answers and show you the answers at the end of our long conversation. So the first question is, where are you? Go to that link that you see now up on your screens and just let us know where you are. I know we've got a bunch of people in Boston because that's what our focus was. But since this is not a live, in-person event, we now have people from all over the world. And for those of you who can't stay up late to watch the whole program, we will have this on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to find it on our Facebook as well. And there'll be a link from our website. So where are you is the first question. Second question. So we're covering all these different fields, right? Genetics, neuroscience, longevity, microbiome, food, human performance, the future of sex, the future of drugs, the future of death, artificial reproductive technologies. All of these fields are poised to be completely transformed by our new biotech tools. So which of these areas do you personally care about the most? So again, go to our poll. You can check the areas that that you're most interested in, whether that's personal interest or perhaps that's the field that you are working in. Just give us a sense of where your focus is. At Neo.Life, we're very focused on Homo sapiens. We're focused on human beings and our relationship to other species and the planet. Others of you may be more focused on climate change, but obviously there's a relationship there, or energy sources. So that's what we're looking for on this question. The third question. So we all find ourselves transformed by this pandemic, and we want to check in with you as a community on the whole. So tell us, what is the biggest risk from biotechnologies that you worry about? It could be bioterrorism. It could be unintended consequences. It could be loss of privacy and freedom. Exacerbating the economic divides, corporate greed. Feel free to put in other as well. But what are the biggest risks in your mind that you worry about? And then, because that's such a downer question, the next question is, tell us how you are feeling on a scale of 1 to 5 cats. Okay, so ready for action, on retreat. I'm just so tired. Angry cat, irritable, anxious cat, or cat what cat? So on a scale of 1 to 5 cats, how are you feeling? And then our final question is, this is a word problem. This is a word cloud. So please give us words to tell us what you're hoping to get out of the event this evening. And I'm going to just leave that up to you. Could be inspiration. It could be hope. It could be information. It could be learning about something new. It could be something very specific. So enough about that. Those are our questions. As I said, we will come back to you at the end of the evening with the answers. So now we are here to start the long conversation. We're celebrating the launch of the Boston launch of the Neo.Life book. And the reason why we wanted to do it in Boston is because the book was actually born here. So I was attending the Global Community Bio Summit at the MIT Media Lab, which is biomakers from all around the world. And that was followed up by an amazing dinner that one of our conversants and book contributors hosted for me, Juan Enrique. And by the end of the weekend, we had decided to do this book. And it's really about creating visions of the future that we want to build towards, because all we seem to hear about when it comes to biotechnologies and synthetic biology from the mainstream media and from science fiction is terrifying. And I wanted to talk to some of the people at the forefront of this revolution and hear their positive visions, what they hope for, what they're building towards, what we should all be thinking about. So I had the good fortune to meet Brian Bergstein, a Boston son who is the founding editor of Neo.Life, and these other extraordinary creative thinkers. The community in Boston is really extraordinary. We feel in San Francisco like we're at the red hot center of everything, but Boston is equally important, if not more so. There's many more hospitals there, in addition to pharmaceuticals and so forth. So you have an extraordinary community of pioneers and innovators there. So speaking of innovation, this long conversation format is a great way to get people talking across fields, across disciplines. And that's where so much fruitful activity happens. That's where great ideas are formed. That's where great innovation occurs. So I just want to call on Brian Bergstein first, and let me just introduce him. Brian has become, hey, Brian, welcome to our live stream. It's so good to see you. So I met Brian about 3 years ago, and he joined us just as we were launching and has been my partner in crime for 3 years of amazing Neo.Life developments. And the co-editor of the book, he did the heavy lifting, and I'm super grateful for that. He is now the deputy opinion editor at the Boston Globe, still covering, obviously, science and technology. And I just wanted to give a big shout out to you for making Neo.Life happen, making the book happen, and sort of shepherding all of these stories into their final format. So thank you.
Well, it was such a pleasure and a great experience, and thanks for making this happen. I love that you now acknowledge that Boston is probably superior to the Bay Area.
No, you didn't say superior.
That's what I heard. That's at least what I'm going to take away. And I'm just so pleased to see all the people joining us from around the world tonight. This is amazing. We have people from Mexico, Portugal, Sweden. It's really incredible. So this is great. And thank you for making it happen.
Absolutely. So Brian, last year when we were working on this book, we were just focused on putting out some positive visions of the future, highlighting the amazing technologies that people were working on and the ways that those could be applied, to clean up our environment, to improve our agricultural food systems, and of course, to prevent disease, predict disease, and eradicate disease. And then we published the book, and then suddenly all hell broke loose. So I just wanted to start by asking you, what has changed in your mind since the book was published, and how are you thinking about Neo.Life and the promise of these technologies now?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is we've all gotten such a powerful reminder of the power of biology, and a humbling kind of wake-up call, I think, about how hard it is to control biology, that it's not so simple as biology being something that we can program to our heart's content. But obviously the whole world has changed in some sense, but the themes that we were going after in this book are still relevant, and in fact even heightened by what's been going on. So as depressing and maddening as this whole thing is, there are some sort of biotechnological bright spots to this. Number one, we're able to sequence this virus and respond accordingly, map its spread accordingly to a degree we couldn't if this had hit 10, 15 years ago. There's not been a coronavirus vaccine, a vaccine for any other coronavirus, and yet we may have one in 12 to 18 months. I mean, that feels like just a terribly long time at the moment, but even that 12 to 18 months would be a huge speed up over the time that vaccines normally take. So it's another testament to how fast things can move, and the things that Jason was talking about this, commitment to sharing data and collaborating and breaking down barriers. I mean, there's a lot of just terrible things happening right now, but there are glimmers of, I think, biotechnological capability that will make us better prepared for the next one. And there will be a next one, and it could be worse if we're not prepared. Mm-hmm. And that still speak to the themes in the book, that we just have these capabilities, and the question is going to be, what should we do with them? What could we do, and what should we do? What should we strive for? How can we make a better world that's more equitable, more just, cleaner? So I think the themes in the book, if anything, feel more relevant. It just might be hard to think of there being anything other than this one story of the virus right now.
Well, and what I've gotten from everybody responding to this event is a sense of relief that, we're talking about agency, we're talking about taking control of the situation, trying to deploy our smartest people, our best tools, to come up with solutions. And B, that for the first time in weeks, everybody has a chance here to take a deep breath. First of all, for everybody suffering from COVID-19, but to secondly, take a deep breath and think a little bit longer term. Let's just look out beyond the horizon to how we manage pandemics going forward, and how we manage everything else, including all of the decisions that we will have to make about how to deploy these tools. So with that, I'm going to introduce the long conversation format. It is a daisy chain of conversations. So it's pairs of Boston-based book contributors speaking to each other from their various disciplines about these ideas. And so I'm going to back away, and Boston, I will let you take it over, Brian.
All right. So again, thank you to Jane and Jason and Jen for making this happen. Siranush Babakanova, welcome. Let's get this going. We are going to have 10 minutes to talk, and then you'll take it for the next 10 minutes, and so on. So Cyrano, so let's jump right in. We met for this book because we were trying to get your ideas as you are a senior at MIT, class of 2020, which is turning out to have a far different senior year than you ever did. But you were one of the co-founders of MIT's transhumanist group called Sapiens. So like Sapiens with an X. So for all the people who are joining us from around the world, tell us, give us the sense of why was there this urge to start a transhumanist club at MIT, and what do you guys talk about?
Yeah, so we are a student group that brings together people from various disciplines to discuss, but also research problems in human augmentation. Transhumanism is a term that has a lot of historical connotations to it, so we try to not stick to it. Language is sometimes hard. Why? Maybe there are important things to notice that at this specific age, there are a couple of existential risks coming with technologies that are becoming available now that we have building blocks of biology being like Legos, and we, like little kids, try to start to learn how to put them together and build something. We can build something that can create a great social disparity, and that may cause something that evolution would not be able to make up for. And on another scale, we also have this threat of artificial general intelligence coming up. And unfortunately, if we don't have neurotech infrastructure available by that time to maybe synergize with that technology to make it think that we're a part of it, again, it's a philosophical question yet to be explored whether it can think or not, but we want to be ready in any case. And that is a threat, definitely. And then the next one is the final one. Our planet is like a basket full of all our eggs currently, and now that we have technology to put ourselves further, it's a good idea to use biology to augment ourselves for space exploration, to put our eggs in other baskets as well. But also all of these technologies we view as opportunities, and as any complex technology, it requires a lot of interdisciplinary collaboration to put together and make real advancement in. And we felt like there's a lot of barrier to go to each one of those departments separately to get the input of the advisors to make a progress or discuss these topics at a fundamental level. So we decided to create that community.
So how many people would you say are members of Sapiens at MIT?
It's twofold. Towards the outside, we host events for many people, not only at MIT, but also from the greater Boston community. So one of our largest events packed the biggest hall at MIT of 700 people, and there were 2,000 on a sign up. And it was a great event that featured the leaders of the field from the Boston area as well.
2,000 people. Did that surprise you that there would be that many people who wanted to talk about transhumanism, that this like quintessentially sci-fi idea has so much
and 50,000 people watching it online? It was really great to see such traction, and not only there, but as I mentioned, that's like just the outwards picture, just the people that come and listen. Maybe later they come back to us and say that, oh, we switched labs, or we decided to make a movie about transhumanism inspired by your discussions. But also internally, our group was it was just so great to see people from physics, from neuroscience, from psychology, from chemical engineering coming together, from medicine coming together, and just being a close-knit community, explaining each other's fields to each other, and really thinking about the roadmaps about some specific technologies. And they are my family, my friends, and having them, I think it will last beyond just a student club, student organization, and we're very optimistic for holding these ties and developing these technologies further together.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, I think that the interdisciplinary approach is something that maybe got lost in the sciences for a while. And, right now, so many things are happening at the intersections of biology and technology, neuroscience and genetics, neuroscience and electronics, and so on. And so to be able to capture that and leverage that, I think is probably really, really compelling.
Yes, hyper-specialization may be one of the things that we're struggling with today, and developing a language to speak across the disciplines has been very interesting pursuit also within our community, and not only within different sciences, but also with ethicists, with people in humanities. Very important, because all these questions that they don't have just large reach, that they kind of like reach in some sense all the different Homo sapiens that live on Earth and maybe will live beyond Earth, but they also can affect very profoundly life of every single layperson, and therefore the policy and the ethics is very important. Like, how do you even start conversation, quantify, and develop metrics for that?
Do you think most of the people you've met through Zapiens are optimistic or pessimistic in general? If you had to pick one valence, what would you say?
Most of the people are optimistic. I don't know if that comes from some sort of filter that we also just are such community, and we are like magnets towards those people, and they are magnetizing for us. Yeah.
So you and I were talking about the work you're doing independently of your work with Zapiens. You're doing research, neurological research, and in particular looking at proteins in the brain. Before my laptop falls down. Tell us a little bit about your work in proteomics and how it kind of captures a lot of what we've been talking about, that there's really interesting new questions that you can try to go after with this technology.
Yeah, I've been blessed to work with Professor Boyden at MIT, and one of the questions that we're trying to tackle is that the field of information is, of course, mediated by nucleic acids, the DNA, the RNA, and we know how to read and edit and simulate it in 4 dimensions, in spatial dimensions, and to some extent in time dimension. So the sequencing for reading, the CRISPR-like tools for editing, the gene circuits to some extent for simulation. However, the functional properties of complex biological systems are mainly mediated by proteins, and we can't even read them at scale. And of course, that's a problem that has been out for a long time, and even in our laboratory as well. And I came to it was an idea that we maybe can leverage on some of the new computational approaches, where we can create modular binders that disambiguate not all the 20,000 proteins that are available in, for example, human brain, but rather disambiguate 20 amino acids from which all the proteins are composite from. So that is the current pursuit. However, such big leap also has smaller, like lower hanging fruit, and by developing the computational pipeline, we'll also be able to develop binders to something that we cannot develop binders with current technologies like immunoglobulins or, for example, dopaminergic receptors is the foundation of the neuroscience, and we cannot disambiguate them with low uncertainty. Yeah.
So we're basically coming to a whole new era in our understanding of the brain because of the technologies for investigating the stuff the brain is made of, the processes that go on in the brain, right? Is that a good way of summing up sort of the opportunity?
Yes, very much the function of the brain, and also trying to develop new technologies to measure it non-destructively, so we don't have to kill the brain or stop its working to measure it at super resolution.
All right, that's good. Well, we're almost out of time, and then it's going to be, I'll just ask one last thing. How is graduation going to work at MIT class of 2020 with everything that's going on? Do you know yet?
We're either going to do Minecraft, maybe we'll do Sims, maybe we'll do those moving robots that have iPads on their faces and hold their graduation. I don't know. But our cohort is definitely going to be very bound with all of this experience. And I think we're dealing good with it, and everyone is just like making so many jokes around it that we almost don't feel the negative aspects. Maybe later we'll joke about it.
Yeah, well, you will have this. All right, you're on with George.
Thank you so much. It's my honor and greatest pleasure to introduce one of the most prolific and imaginative bioengineers of our times, one of the people who was the main inspiration for Sapiens, and George Church. Thank you so much for being on the call with us. And how are you doing?
It's great to be here. It's been a pleasure to interact with you in the past at some of your events. It's a very special time for a very special book and collection of conversationalists tonight.
So let's just jump straight into it. At the times of war or shock, which is relevant to today, scientists and creators are given more freedom to innovate. And it's true, for example, for nuclear weapons or nuclear research in 20th century. And during the time of the peace, scientists are constrained with the funding, with their cooperation, and with lots of regulations. So how do you think we can possibly match the productivity at the peaceful time, and whether it's possible at all?
Yeah, my personal feeling is that the whole peace war metaphor is odd. I mean, I appreciate why you brought it up. It is often on our minds. I think that we actually have less money during wartime to spend on creativity and productivity, even because we're sending trillions of dollars literally to the bottom of the ocean and into fires. But there is still that nagging question about creativity, and I would say that I think what's important is not so much peace versus war; it's change. It's just the same as in evolution. If the environment's absolutely rock steady, then there's a tendency for organisms to kind of fine tune and settle in for the long haul. But if there's any change, like an asteroid hits, then there's winners and losers, and things start to change very quickly. But the change doesn't have to come from outside the way a war would affect creative processes. It often comes from inside. So, for example, plants will make oxygen. That makes the atmosphere toxic to a lot of organisms. They're winners and losers. A mammal comes about, and that changes the game for everybody. And in the case of getting closer to science and engineering, the internet comes along. That changes everything. It didn't require a war to create that revolution. And the same thing I think is happening now with biotechnology, where we've got a 10 million-fold change, an exponential change, 10 million-fold in a few years. That affects all this.
Talking about the change, in your essays, a lot of time you mentioned that we need to favor neurodiversity. And in our current society, we look down on those who don't fit the mold. So how might we get people to be more accepting of evolutionary and developmental neurodiversity to lay the foundation for engineered neurodiversity?
Yeah, it's another interesting question. I mean, I think to some, even the parts of our society that embrace diversity, they're not always embraced. They're embracing maybe diversity of ancestry, diversity of maybe cultural practice, but not really the kind of diversity that's disruptive. And I don't think it's so much. Sometimes it's looking down in the sense of xenophobia, but sometimes it's worrying about the disruption that will occur if somebody is thinking out of the box, and if that thinking out of the box catches on, it may mean that your job is gone. It could mean that your culture changes and you have to learn new things, or you just feel uncomfortable, and that's a legitimate concern. Or you're worried that there's be unequitable distribution, and that even if there's temporary playing field leveling, it can end up with winners and losers that are unpredictable. So it's not just looking down, it's also looking ahead with a great skepticism, and it's a good exercise is to think about all the unintended negative consequences. And when we're in an exponential, especially a very fast exponential, such as the one we're in, is a good time. You can't necessarily apply the brakes. Sometimes when you apply the brakes, is something else in the system causes it to lurch forward faster. But it is a good time to be asking the questions, to be thinking, having just as many people speculating and thinking out of the box about what could go wrong as the ones that are thinking out of the box about how to move things on that exponential.
And so that you mentioned how to introduce the diversity from within. There was also a part where you mentioned that one of the first things that we can do to help people engineer ourselves is to require some sort of genetic counseling before procreation to not allow specific combinations. Could you elaborate more on that, and what is the potential politics behind it and how that would be actually implemented?
Yeah, so there's some nuances. I mean, it's not so much about not allowing, it's about enabling parents to have healthy kids that is very distinctive from some past mistakes. It doesn't mean there's no future mistakes, but past mistakes where the government would sterilize people. So taking away their agency, taking away their right to have a healthy family. So genetic counseling has been pretty widespread since the 1980s. I think a lot of people are unaware of it in some sense or another. They're unaware that the cost has plummeted in getting very high quality information. Used to cost $3 billion for a poor genome, meaning half a genome. And now for $300, you can get a really high quality clinical grade genome. And that is a game.
And you held that effort. Thank you. And
so but they still don't connect. We have trouble thinking about 1% risk. If most people won't get anything that will change their life, and so they say, oh, 99% chance of getting nothing. Why should I bother? Why should I take any time? It's like seatbelts, or for that matter, coronavirus. If I have a 99% chance of living, why not just walk out on the street without a mask, or walk in, take my mask off when I come into the supermarket? So we have trouble with that 1%, but that's the offering that we have now, is to think about that 1% much more seriously when it's life and death, as it is in those three cases: seatbelts and virus and your inherited genome. About 1 to 5% of births, either immediately or longer term, result in loss of life prematurely, or pain and suffering, and very expensive medicines compared to the low cost of genetic counseling.
And you mentioned COVID also being a representative of similar statistics, the usage of masks. What do some of the current initiatives and research pursuits are super various, from making the vaccine to studying the actual virus and how it works and how it evolves, and also to changing the culture of people, as you mentioned with the masks. What are some of the main bottlenecks with the current pursuits? Brian or Jane mentioned 18 months, I believe. What are your projections on that?
I think 18 months might be an accurate estimate. It sort of depends on whether the vaccine works. So if we had said 18 months when we were designing the tuberculosis, the HIV, and the malaria vaccines, we would have been grossly off, because we still don't have them decades later. I think evidence is that coronavirus is among the simpler viruses, but there's a whole phenomenon called antibody-dependent enhancement, or ADE, that we need to be very cautious about, where one strain of virus is ill adapted to the antibodies of the previous strain, and you get a change in tropism. You can get the viruses to now infect immune cells when before they were, say, aimed at lung cells. So we have to be cautious about natural infection and vaccines as well.
And yes.
One other thing is I liked what Jason said about rapid response. We have extraordinarily rapid response now, from going from patient 0 to sequence to synthesis to a vaccine, but 18 months is still, that hasn't shrunk the 18 months mark. That's mostly about testing and scale up, and it has to do with a caution about unintended consequences that take a while to show up. So my guess is both for this infection and the next one, and it could be accelerating. SARS, MERS, Ebola, COVID-19. I mean, I hope it isn't, but we have a very well-stirred population. I hope we take this seriously. And back in 2002, I started agitating for a bioweather map, where it's not just about rapid response; it's about being very proactive and looking for what's happening in your environment. The same way we have citizen science, where we care about what's happening in the weather, we should care both on a global and on a local, high resolution granularity of what's happening.
Yes, very important. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. So it's my great pleasure to introduce and chat with the next speaker, Christina Gallings.
Thank you.
And who I've actually known for quite a while without perfecting my pronunciation of her name. She was did her PhD with Pam Silver at Harvard, and I got to know her then. She was also on the iGEM team, I believe, in 2010, and we even did a paper together on plant synthetic biology, which was fairly new for iGEM, and the team did absolutely. Christina did a fantastic job. She's now director of biotechnology, Ginkgo, which you've already heard about from Jason. But I think Christina has a very special role in that I have great respect for, and in communication and writing in general. And I'd like to talk about that with you, Christina, if that's okay.
That sounds great.
So let's start with this pivoting that Ginkgo has done. Combined with the literally creativity that they had even before that pivot, which I think partly is your influence, flavors, fragrances, foods. I know that you've done some amazing things with cheeses. So what do you see as the silver linings that are coming out of this otherwise horrible event that we're having right now? Is there any creative components that will have a lasting influence? I know that our generation will never forget this, but what could be the good parts?
I think Jason put it really well in the beginning, saying that there's something really inspiring about the way that people have come together to move really fast. There's that expression that people say, like, to go fast, go alone; to go far, go together. I think we're actually seeing a little bit of an inversion of that, which is really great. Like that to go fast against this, we actually do have to go together. People are sharing the sequences really quickly. They're collaborating in ways that are much different than typical, like, biomedical research happens. People are publishing really quickly on bioRxiv. Things are moving very, very quickly because there's this rush to openness and to new ways and modes of working together, which I hope is something that does last. That we can kind of be more of a community that works together to tackle big problems.
Yeah. So yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. When you think about what foods, out of the box way of thinking about them is, in the past there's been proposals and demonstrations of vaccines being produced in foods. Would that have any impact on our current situation? Are there other creative things that we can be looking forward to in this neo-life world that we're moving toward? You know, following up on the vision that you and your team had in 2010, where are plants going? Where is food going in the future?
I think I've seen a few examples of people talking about producing vaccines in plants. Tobacco plants are a really good sort of chassis organism for producing proteins, and so people are talking about using that as a production method for vaccines, which is really interesting. I think there's also like really sort of out of the box thinking as everybody sort of asks the question of like, oh, how could I pivot my platform towards addressing this pandemic? So there's interesting kinds of things coming out with like probiotics or like, you know, various kinds of techniques when it comes to like your expertise in enzymes or molecular biology or microbiology or plants or something else. People are starting to ask the different questions like, yeah, how can what I do apply to the crisis that's at hand right now? And so that's kind of happening. I think really across the board in biology, obviously, but even other places too. You know, what's it called? Breweries pivoting to make hand sanitizer, right? Like I think there is a really sense of like we're in this together. Which yeah, I think that is something that happens. You know, speaking to your comment about peacetime, wartime, I think that's something that you kind of see, yeah, historically in wartime, and it's interesting to sort of see us come together, not against like a nationalistic way, but in a way to you know, like preserve sort of a common you know, our health together, and that's really powerful too.
Yeah, I think we get a little bit cranky and selfish in between times of inspiration, and it's really rewarding to see the internet become a friendlier place suddenly. There's still dark parts, but I think overall it's back to the original inspiration. So you spent a good chunk of your PhD thesis and since worrying about issues of sustainability and equitable distribution.
Right.
You worked on photosynthetic components even in animals and hydrogen production. So where do you think sustainability figures into this near and far future?
I think this crisis now, right? It's so acute, and everybody's working together to kind of to tackle this really acute crisis. I think we haven't had that same energy happen when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. And it really is a crisis. It's an emergency. It's something that we do have to really come together and try all of the out of the box ideas like all at the same time. So I do think that, yeah, and the environment and what happens in the environment and climate change has such a huge impact on human health, on public health. Pandemics and climate are linked. I think I hope that that might be another thing that kind of comes out of this, an energy and a way to collaborate and work together towards these big problems. We're always going to have these things, and we do have another one, and it's climate change for sure.
So you
do have some interesting ideas on climate change too, I know.
Yeah.
And ways that synthetic biology can address.
You're referring to the Arctic, maybe?
That's one of them, yeah.
Yeah, and the other one was so the Arctic is trying to restore us to from the forests that overgrew when we killed off all the herbivores back to the grasslands that have higher photosynthetic productivity and are better at allowing the snow to get packed down and reflecting the light. So it has a bunch of advantages, and the main herbivore that's missing now are herbivores that knock down trees, which are elephants. So we're it brings a smile to everybody that we can bring back cold-resistant elephants. But I think it's I think that hopefully one of the silver linings, getting back to silver linings, is that maybe scientists will be taken more seriously for a while. I think to some extent we deserve a little bit more now, because this is not like a moon mission. This is more like the GPS satellites and the weather satellites and the telecommunication satellites,
Mhm.
really providing things that people can clearly see they need. They can't just make up these facts, you know. It's not about entertainment. It's not about, not just about storytelling. It's about paying attention. And so maybe we will be able to generalize a little bit beyond virology and immunology to other adjacent parts of science.
I'd add to that too, for sure. Like, I think this moment, right? Like what we're seeing too. Like, I think scientists are also recognizing too how these questions of science, the kinds of things that we are like obsessed with, the small of things every day, the molecular details, like also have these really, really fundamental sort of social and political components. That to do bioengineering, we also have to be doing like social engineering and understanding how people interact and the politics of the whole situation. That each of these choices of how we do all these things has this kind of political component, and that this problem, the problem that we have, is a natural, a biological problem, but it's also really a social problem, and exacerbated by social inequalities. So I think if anything, right, like we are seeing like this sort of intersection of science and society and politics, and I do hope that we come out of it at the end with a new perspective on how those things connect.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that scientists are somewhat dependent upon politicians doing their job, but to some extent, scientists can break free as well. So if we can, rather than waiting for politicians to make the technology equitably distributed, we can bring down the cost to a millionfold. That's within our ability, scientists and engineers. If we can come up with a creative solution that is extremely low cost or extremely attractive, in a capitalistic sense, we're less dependent upon the politicians doing their job, and in a certain sense, the politicians could take credit for it. That's fine with me. What do you feel? Same?
I think that's one aspect of it for sure, right? Like I think one aspect of like justice and equitable transfer is the cost of the thing, and but I think it's just one aspect of the way that things are unequal, right? Like the reason we have inequality is not because sequencing is expensive, right? But you hope that with better sequencing we can do something better too.
Yeah.
Make the world better. Thank you, George. So now it's my turn to introduce Steve Ramirez. Hi. He is a professor at BU, and I didn't do my research as much as I probably should have to be able to like fully introduce you with all the accolades in the appropriate way. But maybe I did read your website, and I really enjoyed at the very bottom of your website, you have this really beautiful Venn diagram that shows like the way that you like to do science, which I think is sort of at the intersection of, the things you like to do are dream big, have fun, and get shit done. And so I thought that might be a good place to start, to kind of hear from you, like, how do you, what's your lab like? How do you work? And what are the kinds of things that you do in your lab?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite Venn diagrams, because I think it becomes clear that like the dreaming big is what we do as scientists, right? It's like we get paid to think of solutions to problems that might not even exist yet. So that's the dreaming big part. The working hard, right? That's inherent to any job. Like my family immigrated from El Salvador, and like they've been working hard their entire lives to achieve like what they thought was the American dream, and then miraculously I happened here. So I'm just like, oh my God, like because of you, I'm here. And like they worked hard. Like the least that I can do is work hard and like dedicate myself to my job too. And I think that the lab does that doubly so. And then with getting shit done, it's just like there is a job in front of you, right? It's basically just there's a job in front of you, whatever it is, like whether it's science, whether it's like really anything under the sun. And then if we can do those three things collectively, then I think makes me feel pretty privileged to have the kind of job or career that I have in general.
That's awesome. One question that I thought would be sort of generative for us to talk about is thinking about science fiction. I rarely actually, in the book, in the conversation that George had, he kind of talked about science fiction and speculation and the sort of far future speculation that scientists can do as really important for thinking about progress in science, because like false positives are fine, like being wrong about a prediction of what might happen far in the future. Like, okay, maybe that's embarrassing, but like no big deal, no harm done. But false negatives, like missing out on like being able to predict something and being able to be prepared for it, like that's really bad. And I really like that. And I know that you sort of touched on and addressed it in your conversation in the book, also some questions of science fiction that kind of relate to your work specifically. I think you mentioned Total Recall in particular, your work on memories. So I was curious, like, if there are sort of science fiction stories that are useful to, like, for understanding your work or shape the way that you think about your work and the way that you kind of imagine what the future might be like in the future.
For sure. I'm like, do we have like 2 hours to talk? Because this is like, we can go back and forth nonstop here. I mean, like for me, one of the biggest things is I love Hollywood. I love movies. Like, in the past 3 weeks, one of the silver linings has been that I've become one with my couch and have caught up on all my favorite sci-fi movies. And a lot of them deal with memory. And like my lab works on trying to artificially manipulate memories, both to figure out how does the brain work, and then also what happens if we can leverage artificial memory manipulation to try to fix like psychiatric symptoms, for instance. So there's definitely movies, it can be Inception on trying to implant an idea in the brain, or Eternal Sunshine and trying to get rid of a memory. And the crazy thing is that all of that is already possible in rodents. Like all of that is already here. Like it's the sci-fi part of it. It's like if rodents had Hollywood, then for them it's a reality now. Now the question is like how we can translate.
How do you know that a mouse has an idea?
Yeah, we don't, and this is a big thing in the literature where we have to be sure not to anthropomorphize, because, for instance, we don't know if a mouse can experience something that's as complex and multifaceted as depression, but we can at least have some kind of objective readouts. Like, does it approach something that's pleasurable or not, and things like that maybe we can map onto humans. But perhaps this is where one of the themes tonight so far has been biology. So biology may be like it does kind of, what's the quote? It's like history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think that biology over evolutionary time does rhyme too. So maybe in this case, we look at rodent brains and say, I study mice and rats. So maybe mice and rats are kind of like a tricycle, and the human brain is like a 2025 Lamborghini. So they are different, but we can still extract the principles of gears or how wheels move or motion or things like that, and see if that actually touches base with one or the other. So to answer your question, we don't fully know, but we hope that at least the areas of the brain or the circuits of the brain that are evolutionarily conserved may map onto human brains and vice versa, and then we can make predictions based off of that, hopefully.
Let's go back to Total Recall and Eternal Sunshine and Inception, right? So like when you like, how do those kinds of stories like relate to your sort of everyday? So like, I mean, to give you an example, like at Ginkgo, we have little like Jurassic Park everywhere, right? And we take a lot of lessons from Life Will Find a Way, and we think a lot about sort of genetic engineering and the kind of the wonder of it and the terror. I'm curious if like how do these movies or stories or the sort of imaginary of Hollywood play into the way that you might sort of think about or communicate the work that you do?
This is one thing that I love about this conversation, is that because it's not like a symposium when it's all about science, I can give you the honest answer. I can give you like the human answer instead of we have these hypotheses about how the brain works or so on and so forth. Like, of course we have those, but the reality is that some of our first experiments on trying to either artificially turn memories on or off, or trying to create false memories, or trying to manipulate memories to alleviate symptoms associated with psychiatric disorders, we have the hypotheses and we know how those experiments might unfold. But the reality is that in grad school, there were moments where, it's like you would watch movies like Eternal Sunshine or Inception, and you're just like, man, if I could turn that into an experiment, that's kind of cool. Like, it's that simple, where it was just like, you watch a movie and then you have a source of inspiration of, okay, Hollywood has an unlimited budget because that unlimited budget consists of money and imagination. We as scientists have an unlimited budget when it comes to imagination, but a limited budget when it comes to money. So let's try to like meet halfway and see what we can do with that. So most of that with movies like Eternal Sunshine or Inception, it's like watching them and saying, how can I anthropomorphize this into the species that I'm working with and try to come up with a similar experiment and then figure it out from there. So the short answer is that it's fun to nerd out sometimes and be like, how can we actually turn this into an experiment in the lab? And then we retrofit our hypotheses afterwards.
So I've definitely done this, but at the same time, like, I imagine that many science fiction writers would be like, are you crazy? That's not a blueprint. Like, it's a cautionary tale. What's wrong with you? So I guess, like, yeah. I guess the question is, like, when there is that kind of like a little bit of like uncertainty or like tension or the sort of like drama of a movie that makes it like a movie, like the negative side of it, like how do you think about those aspects? Like, yeah, the work you do feels very like ripe for misuse if you kind of play out the tape, right? And so yeah, I'm curious how you would kind of incorporate those lessons that you get from fiction too.
100%. So this is where, like there's a cautionary tale in anything, right? So in this case, we're talking about memory manipulation here. So the way that I think about it is to try to take lessons from other human endeavors. So like, I mean, I'm sure George would have a lot to say about this, where it's like when the Human Genome Project started, for instance, there was a lot of conversation over, so does this mean that we're going to edit the genomes of our babies? And what does this mean for the future of our species, right? Like the theme of tonight. But that conversation started 20, 30 years before the genome was sequenced. So then I think that with memory manipulation, we're starting this conversation 20 or 30 years ahead of time so that there is this kind of legal and social infrastructure so that governments can't patent genes. Or if you're a good psychiatrist, you don't just manipulate the memory of any person in Boston, right? It's maybe you keep it in a clinical setting to the patient that has living with anxiety or depression or PTSD. So I guess like while the bad is there for sure, I think that the good is maybe by keeping it keeping it within a medicinal or a clinical setting, then we can actually have this kind of ethical and legal infrastructure to prevent its misuse. I hope, at least, one of my goals.
Do you work with like ethicists or legal scholars too? Like, are you collaborating now to ask those questions?
A handful, honestly. Most of them are just my friends, and it's like we can chat about this and have like really candid conversations of like, what does this actually look like? Alrighty, that was awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so I think we're moving on now. Great. So it's my sincere pleasure to introduce Juan Enriquez now, who's the managing director of Excel Venture Management, which invests in life science companies. So this is impressive. He's the author of 4 books, which is awesome, including his most recent, Evolving Ourselves, How Unnatural Selection and Non-Random Mutation Are Shaping Life on Earth. I have a lot to ask about that. It's my pleasure to meet you, in this case, in digital person. So like, how are you? How's your day going?
It's just actually a really interesting day because you get to think about things in terms of what's the future. And I think one of the really important conversations we can have here is what's next, because what we're doing right now is we're playing like a grammar school soccer game. We're all heading for the ball, and everybody's heading towards COVID. And I think this is like an earthquake that has a tsunami that comes after it, that has shock effects that come after it, and that has all the rest of life to come after it. And I think what's really important is we start thinking about what this all means. Let me start with one thing. We have now disinfected on a scale humans have never disinfected before. And when we've done that in hospital operating rooms, you get antibiotic resistance and you get some really nasty stuff coming out. So all this hand sanitizing, all this spraying, all this Lysol, all this Clorox, we may be facing a similar crisis in a year that looks like antibiotic resistance.
Yeah, so it's maybe like trying to stay ahead of that, right? And ideally, like, do you think that maybe as a species, right, one of the themes of tonight, are smart enough to be able to predict that and stay ahead of it? Since the conversation with wiping our hands and so on and having viruses that mutate faster than maybe we're able to treat it has been in the picture for a while, and I feel like it's been in the limelight now more than probably ever before. So are you optimistic basically about where this can go given this knowledge at hand?
So I am an optimistic curmudgeon.
Okay. Fair.
I think there's horrible stuff going on, but in the long run, I think we survive as a species. But the questions that we're asking for humanity right now are absolutely fundamental, because the essay I wrote in the book was about how much we love diversity and how little diversity we have. And in essence, what genome engineers and sequencers have found is there's almost no variation between humans, to the point where there aren't races. And one of the questions this epidemic brings up is, what is the consequence of having almost no diversity in a species? And we saw that with the Irish potato blight. When you went from 3,000 potatoes in Peru to 1 potato in Ireland, it's exceedingly vulnerable to a single disease.
Yeah, and this is something that I was meaning to ask. Like, I loved your section of the book, because I grew up, one of the first things I wanted to do was be an astronaut, leave Earth, go to Mars, and just like really think as much outside of the box as possible. And one of the things you mentioned is that when we leave, or you have multiple rounds of humans leaving the Earth, like to really think down the line, like we almost out of necessity have to diversify if we leave our solar system. So I'm curious, like what does that diversifying look like to you? Like if you're gonna just let your inner futurist really run wild right now, like what does it look like to be able to augment our senses, or to be able to leave our solar system and make it, if anything?
So a lot of people have argued this is a pandemic light, in the sense that it has horrible effects on some people, and it has got extreme effects on the economy. But a lot of us get to sit and think at home, and we are exceedingly privileged, and we have to use that time. And we have to use that time in a way to think carefully about, okay, what are we going to build, and where are we going to go? And this just makes it so much clearer that we have to diversify the human species off this planet. And doing that is going to require some really extreme engineering, because there's been no evolutionary pressure to adapt to environments other than that of Earth. And this is very different from any other planet.
For sure. And I was curious in following up with that, with the terms like natural and random versus unnatural and non-random, of course, are provocative. So I'm curious what those mean, and on again, like thinking big here, what they mean for you in terms of like the evolution of our species. Like what does it mean to have non-random selection, or unnatural in this case?
So what we're seeing right now is an incredible acceleration of evolution. So when people talk about bringing a vaccine to market in such a short period of time, when people talk about sequencing something and altering a virus, when people talk about why does one person get it versus another, and how could you avoid that? What you're really talking about is not waiting for 3,000 years or 10,000 years for humans to become immune to this. What you're really talking about is, let's alter the immune system of a majority of humanity in the next 2 years to adapt to a virus. And that's unnatural selection, right? That's not happening because a few of us survive and get to breed because we survive coronavirus. That's because we are choosing medicines to attack cancer, to attack smallpox, to attack this or to attack that. So it's not nature doing the selection, it is humans doing the selection. And that is an unnatural selection. And by the way, that's been very good for humans in the most part so far. The second part of this is the engineering part, which is what we started this conversation with ginkgo, which is, I want to repurpose this organism to do X, Y, or Z because it's useful to humans. That is really useful to humans. We do so at a large scale at our peril if we don't consider other species.
Yeah, agreed. And do you see those other species happening beyond Earth? Like basically, again, like in who knows how many years, like, can we find life forms elsewhere? And I feel like the section that you had in the book alluded to this. And do you think it would be DNA based, or we are too myopic in our view of what it would look like, and we can't even imagine it. It's not within our ken yet.
I think we're crazy arrogant to think we're the only living species in the universe. I think that
100%.
is the ultimate arrogance. The fascinating thing is what synthetic biologists are able to do now is to create heredity and reproduction in non-DNA based life forms.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically means that we're not a unique solution. That means that there can be many solutions to the issue of life and the transmission of information. And, you know, if you were designing life forms, you certainly wouldn't design them in carbon-based bodies that had 100-year lifespan.
Yeah, agreed. This is why the movie The Blob maybe gets it right with alien life form. It's just this puddle of thing, and it isn't something that has eyes and a face and a head and limbs the way that we do, because then we're making aliens in our own image here, and that's probably certainly wrong given the vastness of space.
You know, it's such a cool time to be alive. It's a scary time to be alive, but I hope this creates a reset for us. I hope it creates a reset for humanity, for how we treat each other, for where we're going, and for making our dreams bigger, not smaller.
Yeah, I could not agree more. That's something that keeps me optimistic too, where it's like, it's despite like all of the tragedy that's going on right now, is that people still come together that much more in this case. And like people are, I don't know, I feel that much more connected to the people in my life right now, even though we're as distant as possible from each other. So I think that there is this kernel of hope there that I think balloons over time as these kinds of situations happen, for sure. Alrighty, I think
kind to each other.
I 100% agreed. Yeah. So I think our time is up now, right?
Yes, our time is up. But can I just say, Steve and Juan, that was awesome. And I want to say to all of the speakers, that was just extraordinary. And I'm super annoyed that I used this format, because I would have made all of those go twice as long. And we're using this interesting platform called StreamYard. And I wish that we could get more of the speakers on together. But it is what it is. We're working our way through it. You know, at some point we'll be able to have more of a roundtable. I just want to take a moment and say, I am enjoying my sake cocktail. It's called a Neo.Life Vision. So stick around. We're going to do some Q&A based on questions that are coming in off of all of the platforms where we're streaming. Our speakers are standing by. And after that, we are going to show you how to make a Neo.Life Vision cocktail. So anyway, amazing speakers. All of those pairings could go longer, and then I would mix them up and pair different people together. But there's a bunch of questions coming in, and I just want to start to address them. Some of these I can assign to, some of these I can assign to individual speakers, but then some of them might be a jump ball. And since we can only have our speakers on the platform at the same time, I will announce what the question is and then step back. So speakers, you are on the line. The first question is from Parnian Barakatain. Oh, yay, Parnian Barakatain. And he says, or she says, a human-made virus might be deadlier and spread faster. So how can we prepare for future catastrophe and reduce or control the process of creating vaccines and making antibody drugs? So, you know, the concern here is obviously we have a virus that has brought the entire planet to its knees. You know, we have the audacity to believe that we can now engineer a vaccine or an antibody drug that will stop it. How do we know that what we make as humans won't be deadlier and spread faster? So let's bring George back up for this too, because obviously he's been involved.
Yeah, so our lab makes synthetic viruses for gene therapy, like adeno-associated virus. We know a little bit about this. We also are part of this rapid response way of thinking. It isn't going to go any faster unless we're willing to take bigger risks. And I don't recommend that. None of us recommend that, but it will depend on how quickly we can see what it is. One option is to isolate humans physically, even better than we're doing right now. And getting very good at that. that would prevent certain kinds. We have a method by which we can make any organism resistant to all viruses, all natural viruses, even ones we haven't seen before, but that won't stop a sufficiently creative virus. I think the best thing is to make sure that we make everybody in the world happy enough with the world that they maybe solve a few psychiatric disorders while we're at it, to reduce the motivation for making such things. Because given infinite creativity and infinite resources, they can make something that's much harder than this one to deal with.
I think George is absolutely right. If there's one thing that showed us is there's no walls. And if one country fails, if one state fails, if we leave people far behind, you can't put up a bunch of bricks and expect that to work. And I'm hoping that this leads to a reset of society where we understand that everybody should have basic health care. Everybody should have a living wage. It makes no sense to leave people far behind because either we move forward as a planet or we don't. The notion of all hell can break loose in your country and it won't break loose in mine, this is a dress rehearsal for stuff that could be far, far worse.
Great. Yeah, I know each of you could speak about this longer, but we've got another question here. As we move towards engineering ourselves, this is from Darren Dasson. As we move towards engineering ourselves, how do we ensure that fads, fashion, social norms, community pressure, and other social and cultural perspectives don't stifle people's engineering choices and stifle human diversity? This is actually, I'll just remind George, and I think Brian, you were, actually maybe it was before I met you, but George and Juan, this was the topic of our dinner the weekend we decided to do the book. So I'd love to hear from you guys, and if any of the other conversants have something to add, please jump in.
Well, fads are not necessarily a bad thing. Fads can be one of the things that causes a spark of diversity. I mean, you could think of oxygen and mammals as fads evolutionarily, but they stuck. Other ones come and go, but while they come and go, they catalyze.
This is there's a bit in a book that Bruce Sterling wrote in like 2000 maybe or 2002, where he kind of talks about engineering like the super babies and sort of like I think he has one of the most interesting kind of like analyses of designer babies, basically saying like if you were the baby and like you get the like top of the line genetic whatevers like when you're born, like your parents decided all these beautiful things, you're going to be amazing. By the time you're 18, like you're obsolete. There's like version like 30 has already been born, right? And it's like, imagine how like disaffected and mad you would be to be the like obsolete genetically enhanced person. And
it takes the middle child syndrome, and it's like, no, the firstborn syndrome.
Really to the extreme. So I mean, like that's like one anecdote that I think of when I hear that question of sort of like fads and engineering ourselves. And the other is sort of there was a really interesting article, I think it was in the New Yorker, about this phenomenon of Instagram face. That now, like, because of like Instagram and filters and various kinds of things that are like the way that we kind of share images of ourselves, there's like a particular look that has sort of is everywhere. And people go to plastic surgeons and ask for that look, right? And so I think basically I'm saying like we already engineer ourselves according to fads. And so it is interesting, like that's another sort of interesting angle. And I think I would love to kind of dig deeper. I think Juan and George, you both talked about this question of diversity and like the way that we think about diversity not being good enough. And so like, I think it's worth kind of like unpacking that a little bit. I don't know if we have time, but like it feels really relevant to the conversation. I think like George, what I heard from you was that like diversity, the people who want more diversity or embrace diversity, like basically like get mad at you when you suggest things that and that you kind of consider that a diversity issue. Anyway, so I like to kind of push back and challenge you there. And then, and for one, I think you said basically we don't have enough genetic diversity, which is maybe true. We have quite a bit, I think, of like cultural diversity, and like therefore we should go to space. And I like don't understand the gap there. So anyway, like maybe it would be, I'd be curious to hear everybody else's perspectives on diversity too, in the context of this question or others.
So I think one of the things people don't understand is how often ethics change. So what we think is ethical or not, the goalposts on ethics and what our grandparents thought was ethical as far as having sex, with whom you had sex, whether you had birth control, whether you did IVF, whether you froze embryos, all of those questions fundamentally shifted. And so I think one of the things that's going to happen in terms of diversity is our grandkids are going to start probably having children that are born in external uterus. You're not going to carry the baby when you go mountain climbing or mountain biking because that's too dangerous. And you may have grandchildren who are really upset with their grandparents because they didn't edit out a BRCA gene, or they didn't edit out a P53 gene, or they didn't edit out a KRAS gene. And right now we look at that and we say, oh my God, how are you going to engineer babies? Why would you engineer, their genes? But for our grandkids, the goalposts and what they think is ethical or not may be completely different in the way that ethics are a shifting goalpost, and technology fundamentally shifts ethics.
Okay, fantastic. Bring me back in, Kent. All right, this is great. I have so many great questions here. We're just going to keep going. We could dive into any one of these. Oh, sorry. Little reminder here for those of you who have the book. There's a missing participant in our conversation tonight, and that's Danny Hillis. So when this was originally supposed to be a physical meeting, Danny was not available. And by the time we locked it in as a virtual meeting, we already had such a full program, it was hard to figure out how to reconfigure. But Danny's essay on this topic is apropos. And I think, Darren, that you would like this essay quite a bit, because it's actually called like How to Design Your Future Child. And it has design guidelines for designing your future child. So check that out.
I like bits about tentacles in that.
Really? One. Yes. Useful.
Yeah, he's like, oh, you could add fingers or a couple extra tentacles.
I know, exactly. And then we could like practice pushing our hair back with our extra tentacles. We'd have many more tentacles to play with our hair and beards with. But I really like this question that's come in from Lin Cheng Kai. And Lin is asking, what do you think is the main bottleneck? And this, Brian, you're going to love this question. So we did following the dinner with Juan and George on diversity, we did a workshop on scenario planning for the future of our species. And one of the things that we spent the most time on was talking about either bottlenecks or accelerants for biotechnologies. And so Lim Cheng Kai's question is, what do you think is the main bottleneck limiting the engineering of biology for our needs right now? And I'm going to step back and let our 6 conversants have at that one.
I actually want to pose this to the true experts around me. Do you think it has something to do with the fact that we still don't really have the tools to manipulate biology in all the ways that you would need? I mean, so for example, sequencing the genome was this fabulous breakthrough, and our understanding of genomics has led to so much, but now it's also led to this realization of how much we still don't know about, say, the role of epigenetics or the role of proteomics and so on. And so like there's still a lot more kind of corners to get around, more bends to go down the road. Could that be one answer to this question?
Yeah, I mean, I take this approach where I tell this to my lab where we study the brain, and I tell them that the brain the universe had 13 billion years. The brain had 4 billion years to evolve to today. 4 billion years. We hopefully live 100 years if we're being super optimistic, and in those 100 years we're trying to deconstruct 4 billion years of amazingly complex biology. The fact that we make progress is amazing. So for me, it's like the biggest gap is it's the knowledge part, and we have to kind of like brick by brick figure out each step along the way. And then once in a while, we get these massive breakthroughs, and it's fantastic. And I think that we'll continue to get there. And I'm an eternal optimist at heart, and I think it's going to be logarithmic, and we'll continue knowing more and more. But again, we're trying to reverse engineer something that's billions of years old on the order of a single career. So we should celebrate those successes that we have along the way, because we're slowly chipping away at the magnificently complicated thing that the brain is, let alone a human body, or let alone a species.
Okay. Stephen Hubbard has several good questions. First of all, hi, Stephen. I'm so glad you're here with us. And I'm going to have to pick and choose because I like all of your questions. But here's one that I think we're ready to talk about, which is I'd like to hear each panelist's one single recommendation to our current world leaders. What would they say if they got 5 minutes with heads of state? So let's go through each one of you.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I can kick it off. I think I would say, I'm not going to take up 5 minutes. I would say, yeah, everyone's entitled to their own opinions, not to their own facts. And that's the beauty about science, is that like it's a difference between somebody coming up to me and saying, hey, this experiment worked and you just have to trust me, versus the data that's independent of your emotional contingencies or your political view or your worldview or your ethical view or anything. Like the data just is the data. Science just is. So then if they could just trust in the data that's independent of any agenda and trust in the thing that is science done right, I think, then I think the world would actually be pretty great. I mean, right now we're relying on science and biology more than ever, right? So I think that if I were to get 5 minutes, I would limit it to 45 seconds and just be like, trust in double-blinded controlled studies and listen to the data, because it doesn't care about your subjective experience or biases or anything. Just again, the data just is, and follow that.
I wonder if a corollary to that is just to get world leaders to adopt an important aspect of scientific thinking, which is that later evidence can prove your initial.
I think it broke off.
I think we lost him.
He's been censored by the political forces.
He was vetoed.
I think if I had a few seconds, I think there's a problem with trying to convince leadership of inconvenient truths. I love the Gore's term of inconvenient truth, but you need to make it at least somewhat convenient. So we're spending $2 trillion on this COVID disaster. Could we have spent $1 billion to avoid it by having preventative strategies in place where we're constantly sequencing the environment, we're constantly testing our ability to isolate and so forth. Same thing for inherited disease. We spend about $1 trillion a year on simple Mendelian diseases. Could we avoid that with a few $100 preventative strategies? So hopefully we can use this opportunity. We won't have to get 5 minutes. We'll all be speaking with a collective set of voices that may be diverse, but will encompass some of these ideas.
I'll add to, Juan said this before, like, that if it's reshaped society, like that would be great. So yeah, I would say we should have Medicare for all and living wage for everybody. That's what we should do.
So I tell them first, forget almost about COVID. Just empower your doctors, empower your public health, empower your health authorities, and have them deal with this. Hello, we have a guest. And please don't fiddle with that. Just let those people do their job. The second thing I tell them is, this is a preview of coming attractions. So if you start getting runaway effects in climate change, you don't solve that by quarantining for a month or 2 months. That's almost game over. The third thing I'd say is, this is one of many dress rehearsals for things that are fundamentally going to change humanity on an exponential scale. So artificial intelligence can do that. So the future of jobs and robotics can do that. A nuclear war could do that. So there's a whole series of things coming down the pike that you really want to think about prevention instead of mitigation. And you have to get ahead of this game because we're in a period which is an exponential period. And the neat thing about that is we can do things really fast. We can change the world really fast. But there's another side to that, which is it's really important to be right when you do that.
I think one of the things that I think that happens right now in the decision making is that decision making very much is based on short-term plans, because their performance right now and something that they can provide within this whatever specific years, and that the outcome can lead to something that may be good for them for their next turn or for the next year or something, and there is not much planning like very long ahead. And I don't know how much just saying things to them can help the situation, because I think very, very great scientists have been on many of the assemblies that were very close to the world leaders and asking and telling them things. And I don't know how many times of just advice has been successful. So I think to think as transhumanists, maybe we can just develop new tools to, instead of using language, just use some other sort of, not brain-machine interface, but rather brain-brain interface where consensus can be reached without having to go through these filters of senses, through the filter of language, and through the filter of the memories and conceptions and archetypes that people have in their subconsciousness, but more freely. So just make the tools no speaking, just connect their brains to each other, make them to make decisions.
That actually taps into another question about, how can we spread the amazing and powerful ideas of the neo-biological revolution? How can we communicate better what the tools are, what the possibilities are? I mean, Steve, I saw you nodding your head as Siranush was speaking. Is that just because you want to just implant the ideas in their brains, or?
No. I honestly think that the way to impart ideas, whether it's in Congress or whether it's to high school students or whether it's to my nieces and nephews, you have to humanize it, and like you have to make it so that it's something that like they care about. And I think that like you can make it something that they care about. People can care about algae if it turns into optogenetics and what we're doing in neuroscience right now. Like everyone can care about like knowledge, like knowing is better than not knowing. We just have to be able to like tell a good story and a good narrative, and in a way that we know our brains are primed to receive that information. Like it's different than reading a Nature paper to my family. So for instance, like when I talk to my
do you do that? You do?
No, because they all fall asleep. No, like so for me, like if I'm telling them a Nature paper, I have to first of all talk to them in Spanish, so all the jargon is gone, and I have to make them care about it. So I have to really think back to first principles. Why does this matter to you? And it can be proximal. Like, why does this matter to you right now? But then like you have me as your son, and then you have grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on. So now you're starting to think about it on the order of generations. So you have to, in my opinion, have this like very human element that you can like leverage as a vehicle to get them to care about it, because then suddenly we all realize that we all care about it. It's almost like a tear jerker of a movie. Like we can all resonate and relate to it, but as soon as we start throwing in our jargon and science, while it's necessary to do experiments, might not be necessary in this case in that kind of forum. So it really is storytelling accurately, but in a way that I think gets people to care about it.
Does that conflict with what you were saying before about like science just is?
Yeah, so but we
like
can,
to me,
get...
I think like that shows that like science never just is, right? Like we bring our humanness to it, and like we have our own perspectives, like, which yes, we can blind studies, but like the questions that we ask, like the things that matter to us, like that we do science on, those are human also, and like that's what brings people to us and to the data and to the science that we build.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I mean, thank you for bringing that up. Like, if anything, to nuance it, and I think that you're spot on, it's that the science is, but then the framework that we work around it now is like where we can actually do our jobs to actually impart that element of humanity to get people to care about it. So while the data might be, I think you're spot on. It's like, it's more than just that, right? It's more than just a bar graph. It's more than just a regression. Like we have to be able to make that thing that's seemingly intangible mean something to people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Kent, bring me on. Okay, so we have a lot more questions, some of which would require me to spend a little more time thinking about them. I mean, these are thoughtful and sometimes difficult to parse questions, but I do have a fantastic question from someone I think all of you know, a dear friend of Neo.Life's and an advisor to us from the very beginning. In fact, the very first story we ever produced was done with Rodrigo Martinez and Veritas Genetics, where we sequenced the genome of William Trubridge, who has won, at the time, maybe there's more, I think there is more, 18 world records in freediving. And so Rodrigo wanted to know, if we sequence his genome, will we find things in his genome that are clues to his success? So if you haven't seen it, it's a fantastic story, the very first one we produced. And Rodrigo is brilliant and a kingpin of the Boston life sciences community and a dear friend. And his question is, where are we in terms of stages of the neobiological revolution? Rodrigo and Juan coined the phrase, the bioeconomy, what, 20 years ago, 25 years ago? Anyway, long time ago. So where are we now? Are we in the beginning? Are we in the early stages? And then what comes next? What is the basis of the next technological revolution? And how might that influence how we think of solutions for this era? So multi-part question. Let's start with, where are we in the stage of development of this revolution? Oh, come on now. One of you is going to have to jump in.
I'll jump in and quickly turn it over to others. I think I have a tendency to think we're at the beginning. We will soon be able to make essentially anything biologically. Almost everything that can currently be made by non-biological means can be made better, atomically precisely. So the natural heir to Moore's law is making natural intelligence and hybrids of inorganic and organic materials. So I think we're just at the beginning. There's a whole of space out there. Whatever form we take as hybrids of technologies we currently recognize with some that we won't recognize, we're just at the beginning. And biology in the sense of molecular engineering and replication and evolution is just the beginning of engineering those.
Before anyone else jumps in, George, can you just follow up? What would be one of the keystone technologies that would make that possible? So if biology enables this atomically precise laying down of material, do you need really cheap DNA writing? What do you need in order to turn this into reality? What would be the kind of the technology that would have this as the killer app?
I think we have pretty cheap, but it will continue to plummet. It's gone down 10 million fold. It'll go easily another 10 million fold. But I don't think that's limiting. I think what's limiting is testing and developmental biology. When you think of 3D printing, say, you're very far from atomically precise. But when you think of developmental biology, instead of having one print head or a small set of print heads, you have trillions of print heads going off. The ribosomes and every part of the cell is printing in parallel. And if we could program that, and we have some very crude programming tools for printing biopolymers and for printing goo with, but I think if we could really harness developmental biology, that would be a huge breakthrough.
As long as it's not gray goo.
There'll be some winners and losers. There'll be things that are converted into the goo. Yeah.
So
It'll be colorful goo.
So there's these wonderful trees.
I had an interesting conversation yesterday with Mike Levin, who just published the Xenobots paper, where they sculpted little.
Wants to.
Oh, well, he makes these little bits of frog embryonic cells that sort of move around and do little biological things. And anyway, he gave me a sort of an angle on the DNA programming metaphor that I hadn't heard before. And I think it adds to what you're saying, George, right? So I think many times we say, so if we can write DNA, we can program it. That's how Jason started his presentation at the beginning. And like we are really early on in our ability to program DNA. Like imagine if every bit you had to flip when you're programming software, it cost you $1. You know, like that would be outrageous. Like we'd never be able to program anything. And that's kind of where we are, right? Like how do we kind of keep accelerating that, make the testing better so we can debug better and keep compiling more and more genetic code? But Mike was saying basically like maybe we're placing the software in the wrong place in the metaphor, that in fact like the DNA is hardware. Like we shouldn't change that out. That's like imagining that computing was like vacuum tubes that you have to swap in and out. So like we're actually in the 40s. In the computing metaphor, because right now, like, you know, the computers, the hardware exists, but you program it in a different way, and that kind of intervention that can program that hardware to do many, many different things, that's more the kind of like developmental programming that he's trying to alter with these really interesting electrical signals or biochemical signals that kind of like make a frog's leg, like limb regenerate, and all of these kind of like reprogramming of anatomical structures without doing any genetic engineering. And I found that to be such an interesting perspective on the on how I think synthetic biologists and kind of especially molecular synthetic biologists kind of think of the metaphor and the, you know, where we are in the history of synthetic biology.
If I can add a little bit to that, I think that it would be, I guess, from a little bit of a physicist perspective, I think we don't have the right theory or even don't have the right data to construct the right hypothesis for correct coarse graining for these systems. We very many times look at them either from the very high level, meaning like organisms and such organize themselves, and we can write some equations and explain how they work, or from like a very bottom level, meaning the biophysics of the single molecules. But everything that happens in between, this so-called emergent different abstraction levels, we don't have tools to map them out and understand how from one we merge to the other one. And unless we physically have some sort of equations explaining that, I think we haven't gotten all the tools yet. And also, as I mentioned, in the fourth dimension, in the time dimension, we don't have these tools yet to study mechanisms in vivo at super resolution, at every single, at the right time resolution as well. And also what George teaches a lot, I guess, was even given degrees of freedom of our biology, we didn't map out all the possibilities where a given cell or molecule can go. And evolution shows us only a few of those, but the combinatorial possibilities humongous, and we should explore that. And then beyond that, this is what we call life because it came out such on Earth. However, the chemistry allows many more different forms of that. So how biology would change if you have different chirality, or how that would change based on some other very fundamental principles of how macromolecules work. I think there's like still a lot of what can exist, and unless we understand how the space works and how to navigate that space, not just bring it out from the attractors of disease, but rather explore more the unexplored evolutionary space, we haven't reached that real augmentative power. But I really hope that this generation is are some of the warriors of that revolution, because selfishly, I would really want us to be able to augment ourselves.
I think in terms of human time, we're barely in the Olduvai Gorge. We haven't even left, Kenya, much less come out of Africa, much less encountered other species and mated with them. And I think this is the greatest exploration humans have ever gone into. And I think it's terrifying sometimes, but it's a spectacular adventure. And I think what we got to remember is just how lucky we are to be a part of this group of explorers, and how extraordinary, how much we have left to learn and do is. This is just the beginning of this thing, and we're arrogant and think we have the answers at our peril.
Wow, that's kind of perfect. I can always trust Juan to wrap it up and put it in perspective. From a man who wrote a book, 20 years ago, called Evolving Ourselves. So thank you. Thank you all. You guys have been absolutely extraordinary, as I knew you would, and as you have been throughout the process of creating the book and communicating with us and each other, and most importantly, for the work that you do. We are so inspired by how hard you work, how much you've learned, how creative you are, and how much humanity you bring to everything you're doing. And it gives me great hope for the future to know that you guys are the ones with the most powerful tools in the world in your hands. I wouldn't want them in anybody else's hands. And, you really do help us think about how we need to approach this next phase. What do we do with these tools? How do we build a future for ourselves that we can look forward to instead of one that we fear? And so I thank you, because in the middle of a pandemic, I think we all needed to take this moment to have a sense of the bigger picture, a sense of agency, and a sense of hope. And I think you guys have done a fantastic and spectacular job. And I hope you will stick around, because we have a couple of fun things coming up next. I'm going to bring back, so this event has been sponsored by Manifest Boston. Jen Reddy is the president, and also Ginkgo Bioworks, Jason Kelly. And Jen has been a fantastic partner for us, really fun to work with, totally understands what we're trying to do, and I think shares the vision.
Yeah.
And so she's got a couple of announcements and a surprise for you.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jane, and for all the speakers. This was really fascinating for me to be a part of, and also to listen to the discussion, as I'm sure it has been for everybody here. If you have not seen the book, the Neo.Life book, not only is it brilliant, but it's beautiful. And we thought it would be great to continue the conversation and have 100 people who attended tonight be able to have that book in their homes and to share it beyond us. So we're going to do a drawing after this for 100 people who will be getting this book, and we will be shipping it to you once we go through the list and the drawings, and we'll reach out to send it to you once it's safe to do so. But it's an impressive book and so timely, as we all just heard, and we're excited to be able to continue the conversation through it. So stay tuned for that. We will make sure we get the next steps clear for everybody, and stay tuned for the book to arrive to 100 people when we do the drawing, probably sometime in May, once we kind of emerge from this situation that we're all in.
And what about Hub Week in the fall? I mean, this has been an annual event for the last 5 years.
Yes.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, so we are determined and fierce about it. So a big part of our mission is convening people. And as I said at the beginning of this, is doers and dreamers and makers of Boston at the intersection of art, science, and technology. And we know that being in person and being able to connect and cross-pollinate across the city and actually globally is important for us. And we're moving forward with our dates for the Fall Festival, and how that will come together remains to be seen, but it is happening September 29th through October 2nd. And we've been doing a ton of planning despite this situation. And we know that we will connect and be there together. So Jane is going to have part 2 of this discussion happening with us, and we are really excited. I think the whole world is going to look completely different by then, and who knows what it will be. But we are fiercely committed to making sure that our community is connected and thriving together in Boston, however we want to do that.
Well, and I look forward to hugging you then and sharing a cocktail, a Neo.Life vision with you at that point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Jen. I'm just so grateful. We shipped books straight from the printer to Boston in anticipation of this event. And then, of course, the world changed. And so I'm thrilled that Manifest has stepped up to offer you guys 100 copies of the book. And I hope you guys get your copies as soon as possible. But obviously, getting in and doing all the packaging is something to think about. So we will keep you posted on that. You will get an email, I think, sometime in the next few days to let you know whether you won or not. And meanwhile, we have one more surprise from you. I would like to introduce Josh de Colongon. Is that right? Did I pronounce that right? I never say your last name.
It's a hard name. It's Decalongan.
Oh, Decalongan. Okay, that sounds got it. Nailed it. Okay, so Josh is the chief mixologist and sommelier for a company called Endless West, and Endless make molecular spirits. And I'm going to let Josh tell you what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, I'm Josh. I am a sommelier and I created a special cocktail for today. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do and what we make. So before I dig into these lovely bottles, be sure to go to endlesswest.com/exclusives and use the code Neo.Life to get 15% off of your order. So you can build this at home as well. But yeah, at Endless West, what we do is we make molecular wines and spirits. So here we have Gemello, our molecular sparkling wine. I don't know if you can see that. We have our molecular whiskey Glyph. And then we also have our molecular sake Kazoku. So that's this little guy. And so what makes us special and what does molecular even mean? So for us, we make these 3 products in the lab. Our wine uses no grapes. Our whiskey has never seen the inside of a barrel. And our sake has no rice. And so what we do is we take a look at traditional wine, whiskey, and sake, and we figure out what molecules make them taste the way they are. We figure out what makes a sake taste like a sake, same thing with whiskey, same thing with the sparkling wine. And we find those molecules from elsewhere in nature. So that might be from fruits, from vegetables, from yeast. And we basically combine everything overnight to craft our own flavor profile. And, you know, some people might ask, why do you do this? What are the benefits to this process? And so through this process, we actually save a lot of water. So in the case for our whiskey and our wine, it's around 95% less water than traditional counterparts. We use a lot less land as well, and we emit fewer carbon emissions. So we do have a big impact on the environment, but something that I like to often talk about as a sommelier as well is that due to climate change and the way that certain things in this world are kind of changing, we are losing access to certain flavors as well. So an example that I like to give is that you know, there are certain wine growing places in the world, like the UK, where 20, 30 years ago, they weren't able to grow grapes, but now they are. There are certain places in Napa, for example, that are uprooting their grapes in favor for ones that suit the changing climate better. So I like to think that we're doing our parts in, you know, sharing flavor and what, and kind of, you know, preserving it and digitizing it so that we don't lose that in the future. So yeah, that's a little bit of what we do, and I'm gonna also show you how to make the signature cocktail, the Neo.Life Vision. So this is gonna use our molecular sake Kazoku. So in my shaker tin, I already have 2 ounces of Kazoku and one teaspoon of honey. I wanted to choose ingredients that, you know, you don't have to travel too far to get, you know, because we obviously want to stay inside. So I do have 2 ounces of Kazoku in here and 1 teaspoon of honey. And then I also have a little bit of lemon peel, a cube of cantaloupe, a couple leaves of basil, and kind of like a small knob of ginger as well. So lots of different flavors. And you just want to add that to your shaking tin. And then you want to release all of the yummy flavors. So just give it a little bit of a muddle. And what's great about this cocktail is, like, I built it around the ginger, but you can really, like, replace some of the ingredients with other things that you might like or might not like. You might not be a lemon fan. You might want to add lime instead. So it's really nice and versatile. And the Kazoku is a nice kind of canvas to kind of overlay these flavors on. So go ahead and do that. And then you're also going to want to add some ice. And we're going to want to shake this. So shaking a cocktail really allows the different flavors to shine. It, compared to stirring, it adds a little bit more dilution. With something like a martini, you want to stir it because, you know, there are fewer components and there are less kind of differing flavors. But for this one, we have all that herbaceous quality. We have that fruitiness, that citrus. So a little bit of that dilution gives the ingredients some balance and time to shine. So we're going to want to add some ice, and then you're going to want to shake it for around 15 seconds. Get your cardio in, of course, because we're all inside. Shake that a little bit. Perfect. And of course, because we do have like a lot of pulpy components in here, you're gonna wanna double strain it into either a coupe or a wine glass. I like to feel a little bit fancy with my wine glass, so I'm gonna double strain it into here. There we go. Of course, because we're inside, I wanted to like use flavors that kind of reminded me of the outdoors. So like a little bit of that brisk kind of basil character, you know, a little bit of that kind of spicy fresh ginger. And then I like to garnish everything with just a slice of lemon and a little bit of basil right on top of there as well. And there we have it. It's so pretty, the Neo.Life vision. Don't forget to go to endlesswest.com/exclusives and use the code Neo.Life to get 15% off your order, and you can make this at home as well and taste our other products. But yeah, cheers.
Awesome. Hey, Josh, cheers to you.
Cheers.
I appreciate this cocktail more than you can possibly imagine.
I'm so glad you like it.
I have wanted a signature cocktail my whole life, and this is my first time. So I'm
there you
go. And I also just want to say I am super excited because I got a special delivery today.
Oh.
I got my sake, my Kazoku sake. I got my Glyph whiskey, and for a Kentucky girl, this is kind of a big deal, right? Because we're all about Kentucky bourbon. This has nothing to do with corn mash or sour mash. So this is exciting. And then there's also the wine, which is Gemello. So for your next party, if you want to show how neo-bio you are, I recommend you try those. So now, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
And so now it is time to bring up the answers to our polls. And we have been working very hard behind the scenes to actually do this. And so let's cue the first question. We asked, where are you? And here are your answers. And I can barely see them. Okay, 22% in the US Pacific, 18% US Northwest, or specifically Boston area. So we did ask to distinguish Northwest, Northeast from Boston. So just specifically Boston area, 12% in Europe. Oh my God, you people are up late. What are you doing? Okay, outside of Boston, but still Northeast, 10%, and US Midwest, 9%, I think that says. So, okay, that's super cool. Our next question, each of these fields are poised to be completely transformed by our neobiological tools. Climate change, 23%, edging out designing future humans as the more important topic. And of course, as we discussed tonight, those two are intimately interlinked and interwoven. After that, eradicating disease. So those are all competing for the top position. Not so many people thinking about food and agricultural systems. That's also because I didn't reach out enough to the community to involve them, but also because there weren't that many people in the Boston area contributing to our book whose work is primarily focused on that. And new materials and biomanufacturing, 12%. Great. Okay. Our next question, this is the downer question. What are we most worried about? And sure enough, unintended consequences and mistakes is number one. I think we all know that we don't know what we don't know. I mean, I do think we know a lot about what we don't know. But can our tools be precise enough to prevent us from unleashing something? It's a big question, and I'm just grateful that the people involved are so thoughtful and so careful about how we move forward. And then number two, exacerbating the socioeconomic divide, that came in at 19%. Bioterrorism is still pretty high, in spite of the fact that I think it takes a huge amount of study and physical expertise to be able to commit an act of bioterrorism when there's so many other ways, if you were wanting to do that you could. But I think in our minds, it's still very scary. I mean, bioweapons obviously have been a terror in the Middle East, but corporate greed is something I worry a lot about. And loss of privacy and loss of freedom. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And then, of course, to cheer us all up, let's look at some cats on the internet and ready for action. Oh my God, look at you guys. 40% of you are not wallowing in quarantine, isolation, self-pity, but are out there ready to make a difference. I love that. Thank you guys. That's the most exciting thing. And ever, and Cat is perfect. So this is really great. And then we wanted to open it up to really get a sense of like who you are and what you're thinking about. And so the final question was, what did you hope to get out of this evening? And if you can just bring up the word cloud generated by that, look at that, hope. That's fabulous. Hope, knowledge, inspiration, celebration, future trends, book. Don't let me forget to tell you about the book. Information, inspiration, insights. This is just fantastic. Thank you guys so much for giving us that feedback and for feeling that way and for being that way. I am really just so in awe of everyone who's been attracted to the Neo.Life idea and everyone who we're tracking as well. If you are, since so many of you are interested in the book, you can still log into that website and give us your information and be entered into the draw for a 100-book giveaway. If you are not chosen, I want you to know that we are going to offer a special discount to the people who attended this live stream. If you go to our website, www.neo.life, you can actually purchase our book for a 25% discount if you use the code Manifest Visions. And I just want to say that whatever books that we sell using that code, we will contribute a percentage of the revenue to Life Sciences Care, I believe it is, which is an organization with multiple chapters, and we will target the Boston chapter of Life Sciences Care to donate proceeds from the sale of the books, because we have a lot of thinking and work to do at the leading edge of neobiology and synthetic biology and genetic engineering and all of those things. But this pandemic is hitting those at the trailing edge much, much, much harder. And I worry about people losing jobs and companies and not being able to pay rent, and especially not being able to eat. So Life Sciences Care is a great organization that I think you might want to support wherever they are active, in whatever community you may find yourself. And then finally, I also, in terms of announcements, just wanted to say that, this has been all about encouraging not just a sense of agency, but very importantly, a sense of long-term thinking. I think we've all gotten very focused on the next hour, the next 24 hours, kind of make it through the day, the next week. We've become very short-term in our thinking. And tonight has been an opportunity to think more long-term. And, the long conversation format and the long-term thinking are hallmarks of an organization that's very near and dear to my heart, which is the Long Now Foundation. And I have the extraordinary honor and terrifying prospect of giving a Long Now seminar next week on April 16th at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. So I hope those of you who are interested in this conversation and this dialogue will please come and participate. I want to make it also a very interactive event, and I want to hear your ideas about how to design the future of our species and what we need to think about and what we should care about. So please join us then for that. We've had some really interesting themes that came out from the evening, just the openness of science, the collaborative nature of science, the desire to share information, the fact that we're all interconnected. There's no walls, bricks won't work. It's also really exciting to think that this is the moment where we get to reset our society. And I love particularly Steve Ramirez's comment that I think everybody involved this evening shared is it is the job of scientists to think big. And, I think the whole world is gaining an appreciation for the power of biology right now. And, we need skillful and thoughtful biologists who can think about the science, who can think about solutions in a way independent of the politicians. And, we may just we have discovered that that science is politics and is unnaturally distorted by that. But politics depend right now on what biologists can achieve. If somebody fails to lead their country through this pandemic, that leader may find him or herself out of a job coming up. And, on the flip side of this, leaders who do a good job could see themselves catapulted into national or global prominence in the 21st century as biology takes a more and more important role going forward. And it's very exciting to think that we may have put the anti-vaxxers down for the time being, or perhaps for the very long term. And the question really is, are we smart enough to anticipate how the viruses will mutate? And, based on what we heard tonight, I have a huge amount of confidence. So I just want to say, please take a moment to breathe for all of those people who are intubated right now. Take a moment to visualize our future. And what we visualize is what we manifest. So let's all manifest a future we can rally around as opposed to one we fear. And with that, I wish you good night, wash your hands, and we love you. Thank you.